Kayleigh's Law is about ensuring that victims of some of the most serious crimes do not have to live with the constant fear that their offender may one day contact them again. For many victims, healing is not linear, and the trauma of a crime does not end when a conviction is secured. The possibility of future contact can reopen wounds, undermine a survivor's sense of safety, and make it harder to move forward.
Arizona was the first state to pass the law. It's also been passed in Wisconsin, with a similar legislation adopted in Tennessee, Colorado, Texas, and Virginia.
So there is an OAN report on Kayleigh's Law, and this is such an incredibly important story. I wanted to make sure that when we had the opportunity presented to us, that we did amplify this because we get to speak to Kayleigh of Kayleigh's Law right now. Kayleigh Kozak joins us, Senior Manager for America Combats Child Exploitation Initiative at America First Policy Institute. Kayleigh, it is an honor to have you on the show today. I'm very happy to hear that this is moving in the direction to help protect people who have experienced something similar to what you've experienced, and we're grateful for the opportunity to speak to you about it today.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for bringing attention to this because it's very real for millions of victims across the nation.
So before we talk about what Kayleigh's Law is, Kayleigh, talk to us a little bit about your story leading up to doing something to this magnitude, to take your experience, your understanding of something like this and say, I need to step up for other victims who might be experiencing what I have.
So I was sexually abused by my PE teacher, who was also my club soccer coach, and when I was in 6th and 7th grade. And I turned him in my freshman year. He was sentenced. And in 2020, I was notified that he had completed all the terms of his probation. Therefore, he was eligible to have the terms of his so-called lifetime probation terminated. And so I actually had to go back to court in 2020 and reface this man to ask the judge not to terminate his probation, because if the judge did, then I would be left without protection. And it was only then that I learned and realized that a victim's protection falls within the terms of the perpetrator's post-conviction registration status or probation status. And I just couldn't believe it. And so I knew I had to do something about it.
Yeah. I mean, you go through the actual suffering of the horrible abuse that you experienced, but then I would imagine, very difficult to put that fear and that feeling away when you've always got this kind of lurking idea that that person is out there and you are the victim to them, and you aren't protected in our current judicial system from having to experience that. So talk to me about Kayleigh's Law. What did you want to accomplish, and how did you go about trying to make it happen?
So Kayleigh's Law stemmed from learning that there was no protection. And I just could not understand how the conditions for the perpetrator may change. And that's what ultimately determines a victim's protection. And I had asked what protection was available to me, and they said none. There is no such thing. I would have to prove that I was in danger. I would have to prove continuous harm. And a victim should never have to go back and prove that they are still in danger from the person who was convicted of violating them, in my case, sexual violence. And so we got to work in Arizona, and we got the original bill, SB 1214, passed, and with complete bipartisan support, it was unanimous in 4 months. And even with the passage of that, we discovered some loopholes. And so there have been several amendments, specifically in Arizona, but then I realized that Arizona was the first state in the nation to pass permanent protection at the time of sentencing and allow the crime itself to be adequate enough. There are several other states that have a form of a permanent order of protection, but they're very conditional. You have to go through an extensive process. It's not as smooth and effortless as Arizona has made it to be, and that is the gold standard for the nation.
We're speaking with Kayleigh Kozak, Senior Manager, the America Combats Child Exploitation Initiative at America First Policy Institute, and Kayleigh of Kayleigh's Law. The report there talked about how there's been bipartisan support, which is always a refreshing thing to hear in the news cycle that we are in currently today, probably always, to see that it's not a political ball to push back and forth, but that you have received bipartisan support in this effort. Talk to me about the process of, from where you are, getting this out there, talking to legislators, and getting it to the point where it is today.
Unfortunately, I think that this is an oversight in a lot of states. I think a lot of victims do not realize that they don't have permanent protection from the person who's been convicted of violating them. I think, unfortunately, it's just been an oversight and something that just needs to change. And so, as we've educated and shine light on this loophole and the fact that victims don't have permanent protection, there has been immense support and almost a sense of urgency across both aisles for people to say, hey, we do need to get this implemented, and victims are worthy, regardless of politics, of having this permanent protection from the person who violated them.
Kayleigh is speaking with us right now, Kayleigh Kozak. Is there a message that you want people who might have experienced what you went through, that type of abuse, is something that you're not, I can assume that you don't ever get over it. It's part of who you are, especially in a formative year, as you were talking about middle school into high school, this being at the epicenter of your, existence, that's not something that you can set aside. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you want other victims to know out there about their rights, about this law, this effort that you're putting through? What do you want to say to those folks?
I think it's really important to highlight that a victim's story does not end when their case closes. They are affected for the rest of their life. And unfortunately, there's a lot of leniency for people who commit these crimes. And so victims are continuously impacted. Over 2 decades later, I am still fighting my abuser in court. And that's the reality that many victims endure. So they don't realize that it is an ongoing thing that will affect them forever. I do think that victims need to know that they're not alone. I understand why they may feel alone, but they're not. And every day that goes by, something could impact them from the crime that happened, no matter how old they were. And they're forever healing. I would encourage all victims to dig into the law. Don't just trust what you're being told. I would always recommend that they get an attorney and make sure that you fully understand and have all the information regarding your case, whether you're going through the process or it's post-conviction. And don't ever be afraid to ask questions and know your rights as a victim, because you do have rights.
Kayleigh, the June 3rd report that I'm holding in my hand on rightoncrime.com says it was advanced out of the U.S. House Judiciary Committee on June 3rd. Does that mean it would still need to be voted on? It's not into law quite yet. Is that correct?
That is correct. So the bill did make it out of committee through the markup, and now it will go to the House floor, whether that's on suspension or it has to go through the Rules Committee, but it should be moving to the House floor. And we do anticipate having complete bipartisan support. Once we get through that process, then the bill will go over to the Senate and we will begin the whole process again.
Yeah. Do you feel like there are listeners right now who this might resonate very, very personally and very close to them right now? Is there anything you'd like people listening to do to contact their legislators to talk about this, to encourage the support for this law?
Yeah, I think specifically in Missouri, I would like to highlight that the permanent order of protection is currently on the governor's desk. It was sent to the governor on May 28th as part of a larger public safety bill. And so he has 45 days to sign that into law. And then victims in Missouri will be able to petition for this permanent order of protection. But for all victims, regardless of where you are, dig into the law in your state, request meetings with the legislature in your state, get involved, ask questions, and don't be afraid to make some noise and bring attention to things that need to be changed, especially when it comes to protecting children and victims of these heinous crimes.
Yeah. Well, Kayleigh, thank you for having the bravery in the midst of such a horrific situation for you. I'm very sorry that you've had to endure that, but I'm very grateful that you have been willing to use your voice and your experience to protect, ultimately yourself, but all of those other people who will benefit from this law once it gets through. Thank you for having the courage to do that and step up and make something happen.
Thank you for helping spread the word.
Take care. Kayleigh Kozak, it's great to have you on the show with us. Senior Manager, America Combats Child Exploitation Initiative at America First Policy Institute. You can look up Kayleigh's law and learn a little bit more about it. The Right on Crime article that I'm looking at right now does mention that it was passed out of that Judiciary Committee. It's a lot of ideas get put into the hands of legislators, and getting out of committee is a very big deal, because then that means it's been taken seriously. It's been looked over and scrutinized and improved. And for Kayleigh to get it that far, that's fantastic, and we hope for success in the future.